the Education Lounge podcast.
So one thing I wanted to talk about, well, to ask both of you, is what your relationship with reading was like as a child. I think I know yours.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe you can tell us.
I grew up in a house of books.
Made of
Yeah, made of books. Like, literally.
So what happens when it rains?
Well, it's got a good cover. So
Nice.
it's got a good jacket. So I feel from a young age I had a very good relationship with books. Started reading quite young. I don't even really know how young, but I could read pretty much anything by the time I was 11, like quite with relative ease.
When you say anything, what do you...
Like, I think I would have had no trouble reading Jordan Peterson by that age, or
Really?
yeah, like I never had trouble, or The Great Gatsby. I read some. I was reading adult books by the time I was like 9. So
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't doing that.
I can imagine John reading books.
yeah. Then my first adult book that I read was Jurassic Park, like the actual book by Michael Crichton, and yeah, that sort of kick-started sort of reading more difficult books. But I'd also say, like, there were some children's classic books like Narnia,
That's my favourite.
the Narnia series, because I think they're interestingly placed, and I always recommend it to people who... There's a lot of parents who say, okay, how do I get my child to read more difficult books? I think this is a good gateway series in a sense, because it takes them... Like, it's not ridiculously difficult, but it's slightly more challenging than what they might have read before, and they're not very intimidating. They're not very... like, the whole series is quite thick, but if you take a single book, so The Magician's Nephew, it's quite thin. I think it's a good gateway series to more difficult books. So I had a good relationship with books. I'd actually say when I went to secondary school, my reading was curtailed. I think that is a issue with the school system to some extent, because I do think I was onto a good thing with all the reading and stuff like that. And I imagine that I would have read a lot more if I'd had more time. But at the same time, it's sort of, I guess, technology as well. When we were younger, it wasn't so much of a thing, because like the internet was kind of, if anything, a luxury. Like when I was like 10, 11, and then it started to kick off.
Well, when we went to secondary school, basically.
Yeah, and I do think that probably affected my reading negatively. Like, you got to think, like, reading is entertainment, and it's competing against other forms of entertainment, and thus first of all, it's much more difficult to get into a book than to just watch a video. So takes a lot more commitment, and I think a lack of commitment sort of appeals to a teenager a lot, and a young man mind a lot. So books have it difficult. They've got to compete with a wide arena of things.
This was one of my issues, because I was always more interested in, like, taking things apart or building things or watching TV, because it's
competing with time with other things.
It's much more stimulating. Whereas if I was to sit down to read, I wouldn't enjoy it.
But then your relationship with books has sort of got better.
Yeah, well, when I was younger, I didn't really enjoy reading. The only book I've been actually addicted to was the Harry Potter books, specifically the third one.
That had that Harry Potter book.
Yeah, so this is my original copy.
That's the original, yeah. That came out when we were in year 3. We're the exact
That long ago.
We're the exact age of Harry. Like, our year is the exact
That's
age.
interesting.
So yeah, on the third book, I was hooked. Then the film started to come out, and after the fourth book, I didn't read anymore.
But I suppose like at least you read something. That's is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, I read like Roald Dahl books and that sort of thing.
What year was you by the time the fourth book came out?
Well, the first book came out when we went to secondary school. So when they went to Hogwarts, we went to our first year. So I'm going to assume it's the fourth year of school. So what's that? 7, 8, 9, year 10?
Yeah, I suppose my reading was slightly different than most people in a sense, because a lot of people want to read something that's related to them, and I suppose like Harry Potter fits into that well, and other series. Like children's writers are usually they like write about the life of a child or something like that. But then I think I was hooked on. I think I was more interested in the adult life and lifestyle and that kind of thing. So I tended to gravitate thus to more difficult books earlier on.
But I think you're quite unique in that way. For most people, that's not really the case.
Yeah.
What was your...
Growing up, I used to love reading as well. It's changed a lot since then. I mean, Narnia was one of my favourite series of books to read. Like, we didn't have internet when I was younger, which is funny you say that, so I forget how old I am. But we used to spend the summer holidays cooped up in our rooms, me and my siblings, just reading books. That was our thing. We used to love reading. And I think as we got to secondary school, you're right, there's something wrong with the education system, because by secondary school, there was no longer any time to read. And actually the love for reading was kind of sucked out of you by this imposed reading material. And yeah, it's changed since then, you know.
Was that because it's sort of the specific books are forced onto you?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think where we used to read for pleasure, choose whatever book you want, kids series, adult series. By the time you're secondary, you have to read this, and you have to go at this time. You're like,
I think there's a similar thing with music, because when I wanted to learn my first instrument, I saw somebody in my class in year 2 play the violin for us, and I was like completely mesmerised by it, and I thought, this is incredible, I want to do this. And I started to learn the instrument, and as time went on, the fun got sucked out of it.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, you've got to do theory, oh, you've got to do this particular piece for this grade, and if you don't get this grade, you can't continue. It's like, I just want to play the instrument. I want to enjoy, and it's a similar sort of...
Just want to read a book.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, like there's been times, like for instance, I didn't read Othello until fairly recently, so Shakespeare text, because one of my students was doing Othello for an A-level English exam, thus I needed to know the play. I've got to say, like, when I was reading that play, I think I feel things in the written form more than most people, probably because I'm kind of into reading, and I think it is very visual for me. Like, it might seem a bit strange, because you think, okay, well, like, why not just watch the TV or something like that? But I think there's something emotional about visualizing the event. And I've noticed this as well with like people who, like children who struggle with understanding and comprehension. They don't necessarily see books the same way, so they don't see the written word in the same way that I do, and they might not be as visual in their understanding of it, because
I think the art of being able to visualize is, well, it's just declined. Like you said, there's so many other things to compete with. You've got your games, internet, TV, films.
Yeah.
Visualization is an imagination.
Yeah.
It's sort of dying a death.
Yeah. It's like I can read, like I was reading Othello and Desdemona and their interaction together and their dialogue, and I could feel like the emotion behind it. And I think like for some people who read it, especially students who are studying that text, they probably don't feel it the same way. They don't feel it as deeply as I do. But it's hard for me to, and I mean, the only way I can sort of, I've got to put that passion into how I teach it.
Yeah.
So they understand and also like relate it to things that they understand.
I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they read it and then they don't understand, and they think like it's just the meaning of the words that matters, but it's more the atmosphere it creates and that kind of thing. And I think some children and students just generally they have a poor grasp of tone and atmosphere and how that's created in literature, and they probably just feel it less intensely. Like in school, I think we're obsessed with analysing.
Yeah.
And I think that's come at the detriment of feeling the literature. Like, it's all very well, like saying, okay, well, this word has this effect and it links to this theme.
I think you're right. It's very, very technical, even in terms of writing. We used to, back a few years ago, we used to look for the writer's tone in the story or the text. Is that can you see the writer's tone? Whereas now you're looking at punctuation and grammar, and it's almost systemic. The children are no longer writing; they're not flowing. The writing's not flowing anymore. They've got the colon and semicolon and the parentheses. But
It's too rigid.
It's too rigid. Yeah.
I've definitely seen that. Like the style of essay that people write now. I think teachers are obsessed with get this grade, like pass. I want the majority of my class to pass this. How am I going to get them to do that? And they tend to have a very hackneyed and formulaic way of expressing themselves. And to be honest, the only way to develop your style, your writing is a product of what you've read and what you've been exposed to. So that's why reading is important, because there's something ineffable and something that you can't grasp in explaining how to write something. Like, I can look at a student's, I can pick out all the flaws in a student's sentence or something like that. But to actually teach them how to write a better sentence is difficult. And it's kind of boring, to be honest, to learn it that way, because you can break it down into little bits and you can say,
and that's where it gets technical, because then they get that idea that it has to be like this and this, and that's how they start writing, like this and this. But that natural flow, the writer's tone, the author's voice, it's all lost.
Well, it's something you can't really explain, isn't it?
It's something you can't explain. And that's
you can explain like punctuation and whatever else.
You see, you can explain it, and you can explain why certain things. It's like explaining the mechanics of a joke. You can do it. But there's
if somebody uses that mechanic to do every single joke, technically it's funny, technically it works, but you can feel that there's
the forced nature.
Right, it's a bit forced.
There is obviously something technical going on in language, and I constantly look at that because I'm teaching A-level or GCSE or whatever. So you see those aspects, but then to actually be a good writer and to understand how it works and to get that full emotion out when you write it, you need to read. Like, there's nothing else to it.
So what's your relationship like with reading now? I didn't realise that you were such a big reader when you were
I was a massive reader when I was younger.
No, I didn't realise that.
Now it's pretty much non-existent. I read what I have to read in terms of articles and research papers, but I don't read for pleasure. The last book I read, this is going back, like properly enjoyed reading, would have been The Alchemist, and that was a good 4 years ago, I think. Like, I read from beginning to end, just because of time, to be honest. There's no time to read it, there's no time to enjoy it, and even that book was a struggle to read. I used to read late night in my bed, just reading, but I don't get the time to enjoy books anymore. So it's just a really bad relationship at the moment.
It's interesting, because mine's the other way around. See, when I was younger, I read what I was forced to read. And now I don't read as much as I should.
But you're still reading for pleasure.
But I want every book in my head. I want all of it to just be there. I mean, nowadays I don't really read fiction.
You don't read fiction?
Not really. I read the odd bit of fiction, like Animal Farm or like Brave New World, that sort of stuff.
All the dystopian.
All the dystopian ones, yeah. Because it resonates with me. I get it. Otherwise, I'm just reading business books. So, I mean, I can go through some stuff that I'm reading at the moment, or have finished reading. So, Atomic Habits and Psychology of Money I've finished. And then I'm reading a book about the gut. Just
Gut. That's
yeah,
gut.
yeah, your second brain. And then I want to get onto this book, Systemology. So for everything that we're doing here, like
So this
creating.
you said for everything that we do here. So is it for fun or is it for research purposes? Is it for
both.
for knowledge? Like you just want to know more. You just need
I want to
better.
know more. The more I know, the more we
you
can
can
grow.
do.
Yeah. Things like this podcast or website or just the businesses in general, systemizing all of it, getting all the processes sorted. I want to get onto that. So yeah, it is work related. I don't have to read it. I could not, but
But you choose to,
yeah,
and you enjoy it.
yeah. I enjoy optimizing things, and ultimately, it's going to help everything
Yeah.
grow.
Mm.
I was also looking at Stephen Hawking book, just a bit of science.
I also have
These are some interesting books. Is there a God? How did it all begin?
Yeah, but he uses all the science behind
Have
it.
you read it?
About halfway through.
Good.
It's interesting, yeah. It's interesting.
there's a brief history of time.
Yeah, that's the one that goes with this.
Yeah.
A little red British bookmark in there.
Yeah. 'Cause I want to borrow some of your books. You know, they look.
You can.
But I'm gonna have to find the time.
Well, even if you read one page a night,
Yeah.
this is why I mean, I was doing that for a bit. I've fallen out of the habit the last couple of weeks, but I was reading like a chapter of this a night, or like a section per night,
Yeah.
and I'm a couple hundred pages in, which for me is a lot. So same with that. So yeah, my relationship with reading is a bit different now.
Well, that's good.
And then I'm also doing audiobooks as well. At the moment, I'm on 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. I'm trying to think what else. There's a few. But they're mostly self-help and business, really. That's my
It's
interest.
really good though.
I think that's quite something else I want to talk about. It's a bit of a male thing. Guys seem to prefer non-fiction.
They do. Boys, younger boys do as well. To be fair.
Yeah.
Prefer non-fiction.
It's Peterson, isn't it? Boys are more interested in things. Girls are more interested in people, which makes sense.
It's funny you can see that from a young age though, because you see the.
I was definitely like that. My sister would read non-stop, and I'd be there taking a radio apart.
Because why not?
Just that's what it was.
Yeah.
Well, they teach you different things. That's so like.
But it's down to your interest as well, isn't it? It's not just.
Is I mean, I like books that sort of marry your interests with, whether it be non-fiction with. So like, the example that I talked about earlier, Jurassic Park.
Dinosaurs.
There's a lot. I think it appealed to me as a boy because I like dinosaurs. Like every everyone, there is everyone goes through a dinosaur stage of
I'm just going to
life.
clip that bit out. Sure. I like dinosaurs.
This is backed up by. Yeah, it had the scientific edge to it. So there was talk about that these Jurassic Park dinosaurs, they were combined with the DNA of a bullfrog that allowed them to cross sex. So even though the original dinosaurs were all female, some male dinosaurs could. Well, some of these female dinosaurs became male. In the same way that some bullfrogs, they can cross.
This is in the book.
Cross sex, yeah. So like, yeah. I just remember like I think I was like 9 or something like that, and I just found that really interesting. So it's like boys are interested in those little facts. Not to say that girls aren't, like
They're less.
But I'd say like it's definitely something that I've noticed, and when you have like a bit of fiction blended with that non-fiction, I find that an ideal mix. So something that you can learn something from. But at a deeper level, like there's other things that, like I said, like the nature of romance or love. I think I understand that a lot better as a result of my fiction reading.
See, I understand it better because of my non-fiction reading.
I don't understand it, guys. You gotta help me out.
And like how to talk to people in a sensitive manner. You can. There's two ways you can approach it. You can be given rules to follow, or you could actually experience some of those conversations. And I find that fiction
Creates that
provides
setting.
that.
But then what about books like How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're totally valuable. They can give you the rules, but they I don't think they help as much in crystallizing what it actually means.
Does it go back to that? Does it go back to that talk about that systemic mode of thinking and writing and reading, where you're just following the rules, but there's no natural.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends if you implement it, right? So if you have the rules and you take that out into the world, then you
But even if you
create
implement
your own story, sort of thing.
even if you implement it, you just be following the rules rigidly. Whereas if you had someone seen that in mixture during a conversation or a dialogue, you might see it applied.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think you'd follow it rigidly,
But you can take it.
but I see what you're saying.
I feel like when you follow rules too rigidly, it kind of becomes a little dull. Like a lot of
Yeah,
those.
so the same thing we were
A lot of it,
saying earlier.
Yeah. But then that's what I think fiction brings, and I mean boys should try and read some fiction books. There's still value in them. It's just that it's a different type of value. It's not necessarily as measurable.
See, with how often I sit down now to read, I would rather use that time to read this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Because I can implement it. It's useful. So we've spoken about our
Relationship.
thank you, our relationship to reading. Currently, what's yours?
Well, I do need to read a lot because of students, essentially. But I tried to make the best of it. So, like I said, Othello wasn't necessarily something that I was going to, like, really aiming to read this year, but I've read it. I enjoyed it. I try to approach things. I like another book that I read recently was The Great Gatsby. I've read this before, but I needed to remind myself to teach it, essentially. And it did, when you read it again and you read it with teaching in mind, it is a bit different.
Yeah.
And you kind of enjoy it on a different level.
I think I might have to borrow some books off you.
I've got so many books. I've got like a library.
Just pass the books this way. Everybody pass the book to me. Next.
We should do that though. Let's like exchange one book for another, or all read the same thing,
For
like a book
time.
club type thing.
I don't have enough books.
Start a book club on the channel.
But yeah, like sometimes I look back and I think, well, it didn't really affect me perceivably at the time necessarily, but I'll give you an example, like this book. So I must have read this quite young, Myths and Legends, and it's just got Daedalus and Icarus, like those classic Greek stories.
Do you want to show it to
Yeah.
Ian?
I ended up doing like an ancient history and classics degree and a philosophy degree, so combined. I know it must have stemmed from something, like, and it was like this early childhood reading. So
Actually, I used to read a little bit of this sort of stuff. I don't think I went anywhere near in depth as you have.
and I'm shocked that people don't know more. Like as in when I talk to children now, it's like they don't know any of these stories, and I'm just like, aren't they?
I didn't know a lot of them, even now.
But having said that happens a lot across cultures. Like why don't we know more about like Indian culture stories and black culture stories and things like that? Like I think you can read anything and it gives a new dimension on life.
And they all have a similar message, really.
A lot of the time, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how it permeates across cultures, and you learn how to they give you moral lessons sometimes, books. I think you end up being a more moral person as a result of the reading that you do. It teaches you morality, because it teaches you about like someone else's perspective. When you read a book, you gain access into someone else's brains and thoughts and feelings. I think that's just a priceless asset.
Well, it's not even just that. It's like if you're trying to figure something out, there's almost 100% chance that somebody else has been through this problem before. They've figured out how to solve it, and they've written it down somewhere.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to go through all of the errors yourself. It's been done before.
There's something comforting in the fact that you look at a library and you can say to yourself, if I have any problems in the next few years, or if I'm trying to solve a problem, the answer probably
somewhere in there
lies within it.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a comforting thought.
What's your opinion on physical books versus e-readers, I don't know, iPads, Kindles, whatever else, and audiobooks?
Initially, I thought, well, with e-readers, I thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Looks like battery's dead.
Well, my first instinct was that it was a great idea, right? But then when I use it, I don't enjoy it as much.
I found this.
I felt this too. Initially, it was like the best thing you could read anywhere.
I was like,
on my phone. But actually,
I was like, this is incredible and revolutionary, and it doesn't even give you like the screen fatigue like that reading off a tablet could give and that kind of thing. But it's just not.
There's the same satisfaction not there, is it?
My Kindle was always on my iPad.
I tried reading on my phone, but you just can't get into it. It's entirely different.
I think it's
than a
good for short bursts. Say you're like on the train or
an online article or a report or something is fine, but to read an actual book, get into a meaty book.
The one good thing that I can think of in Kindle in particular is you can see where other people have highlighted.
Yeah, that's good.
How do you mean?
So you could go into you're reading through, it will have an underline section. So you can highlight whatever you want. You can export your highlights into document or whatever else. But you can also see where the majority of other people have highlighted specific quotes. So you could go through your Kindle book and see like this many thousand people highlighted this bit, this bit, this bit, and this bit, which kind of gives you an idea of what the key points are. It's like having thousands of the same copy of one same book from several different people that have made notes.
Yeah, I remember there was
it's quite clever.
It is good.
There was like a report that I was doing for school, and like it was a paper on the Vikings, something like that, Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, and I bought a book and it was a pre-owned copy of a book. It was on the Vikings, and this person had annotated it, and it was really helpful, the annotations, because they pointed out like the important parts that I needed that I could use. And I mean, that was completely different. That was with a physical book, but I was like, sometimes it can be helpful on a physical book as well to have notes.
See, my mum and my sister both really love secondhand books they've been annotated in.
Do they?
They both it's the thing that they really like. For me, I don't like writing in my books.
You don't?
I don't.
No, I totally understand that. Like when you want a clean copy of a book, but
I always want a clean copy. Even if I've got a clean copy, I wouldn't want to write in it.
I can't even open it to like, you know, when you fold it back and crease the reams. I can't even
to break the spine.
Yeah, like this. When some people just open, go straight in.
Yeah, I hate when I've just got a book. Like, oh, look at this book I've just got.
Yeah,
you've broken the spine. You know? If anyone's going to do that, it's me.
But now, physical books, I think there's a lot to be said about physical books. Just turning the pages.
Tactile, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just very, very tactile. You need that. I think that's part of the joy, isn't it? And to see it physically get thinner, how much you've read. As you can see, you've read a part, and when you come to the end, you can see that it makes a difference to see it visually and hold it in your hands. Like, I'm almost there. I'm nearly at the end kind of thing. Whereas with a online thing, you never see that, do you? So
No, it just says at the bottom, like, 20-something%.
It's just another page.
So where do you stand on audiobooks? Because I have my opinions on it.
Space saving was very well.
Well, these are both, audiobooks and Kindle are space saving. But
Space saving, but the thing with an audiobook, and this is something I always say to parents as well, like they're a brilliant way for children and adults who maybe don't read as much or don't have time to actually at least enter a book. Now, I did say there was a bit of a limit with this because there's certain things that matter with an audiobook. So the narrator, I said, like for instance, 12 Rules for Life. Now, I started listening to the audiobook.
I'm trying to get him into Jordan Peterson.
I know, I like Jordan. I've been watching a lot of his things.
Okay, finally.
I need to read his book. Can I borrow that, please?
Yeah.
Actually, I've got it on Audible.
I started listening to it, but I find his voice, he's very, very serious, his voice. I find that that's not the best way to approach reading. So I much prefer
Reading yourself.
myself. But then when you have a really good reader, so the classic example is Martin Jarvis, like really famous narrator.
No, I don't know either.
No, I don't know.
Just the voices and the emotion behind the voice and stuff like that gets you into it. Sometimes books that are narrated by authors are good if they've got the right voice for it, but I wish that he had someone else reading his books. He doesn't have a bad voice or anything like that. I just find he doesn't have the best voice. I'd rather, and if you're paying for an audiobook, you
want to hear a good voice.
You want a good experience, generally.
I don't know, a lot of the reviews, people are quite happy to hear him speak. They find it quite calming and soothing.
No, I don't know. For me, it kind of slightly puts me...
It's a personal thing. I get what you're saying.
I've never actually listened to a full audible book.
Oh, really?
Never.
I like listening to the story of different business owners. So like Shoe Dog, for example.
That was the other thing we were saying.
Shoe Dog, the Netflix one. What was the other one? The Netflix one, Shoe Dog. Richard Branson, yeah.
I think there was a distinction between the different types of books and the medium.
This is what I was going to go on to.
Best represent them. So like, I've got some really technical financial books and stuff like that. I can't. I couldn't listen to that on audiobook and then start reading out the tables and stuff like that.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Like how would you put that into an audiobook?
But they do. That's the thing. Like they do. And some of them have these like helpful like pop out PDF things that
they do.
That go along with the book. But I find that in the majority of cases, if you've got a very, very technical book, especially with loads of figures, it's better to have a physical copy.
Yeah.
So you can audible that graph for me.
This is what I was going to say. I mean, I assumed you'd say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean...
Can I see? How would you even audible this?
Well, they, like John said, they would narrate most of it, and then I'll give you a PDF.
Labour force participation rate for men. On the bottom, you have the years 1880.
Bar 1, 75%.
Is that how it goes?
No, it'd be a PDF.
They always read the figure number, and it. I don't know. For me, it just sounds lame. Like
refer to blah.
But
blah,
I suppose
blah.
that's the point of bar graphs and charts, is the visual element. You can't really listen to that.
Yeah, so a lot of business books, like self-help books, if it's like about money or habits or systems and that sort of thing, I would not use Audible. But if it's like, how did the founder of Nike start his business and get it to where it is now? And here's the journey of him going to Japan and drinking whiskey with these people and making shoes in this factory. And
so you could tell
the
his
whole
story.
storyline is written by him. There's no graph. It's just a really interesting story.
Yeah.
That you could also take business tips from. That would put into Audible.
I also find like really difficult books quite hard. Like for instance, there's a philosophy book. So I read this at university, and honestly, if this were read out, I wouldn't have time to understand it. But if I read it, then I can put it together. So, like for instance, so this is from an essay. What is it like to be a bat? Okay, it's about qualia, or the subjective feels of experience.
That's a question I ask myself every day.
So it's like if you just read it, you'll see why I don't think it takes well to an audiobook. Consciousness is what makes the mind-body problem really intractable. Perhaps that is why current discussions of the problem give it little attention or get it obviously wrong. The recent wave of reductionist euphoria has produced several analyses of mental phenomena and mental concepts designed to explain the possibility of some variety of materialism, psychophysical identification or reduction. So, like,
Well, that was an audiobook for us.
but to be honest, that would just lose me. Like, I'd just be like, what? So, after listening to that, I don't think I could truly process
What's
every
being
part.
said.
And that's another reason why I think books are special, because they get you to pause on things. Whereas like most media, they encourage you to view on, right? And obviously, like, creators want you to view on.
It's not just that, because you can also skip back and say, oh, what did they say a couple of chapters ago about that? Because they referenced it now, but I forgot what it was before. You could just go, oh yeah. Whereas on Audible, you're going to have to skim. No, it wasn't that bit. No, it wasn't that bit.
With a difficult book, I might want to look something up. What if I don't know what, like, reductionism is?
Yeah.
So you need, I think, the right medium for whatever you're trying to put out is hugely important.
I'd agree. I wanted to ask you something as well.
Yeah.
Reading in schools,
Yeah.
is it, obviously it's encouraged, but is it nurtured? How is it encouraged? What do they ask you to?
It's strongly encouraged and nurtured.
What sort of?
One of the basic things they have is a reading corner, and I've been to a few schools, and reading corners are very prominent in all schools. You've got one as well. And the reading corner, not just to have books, but to actually decorate it and display it in a sense that is appealing to children, and create a little space for them to sit and read, and make it linked to their theme or their topic or their classroom environment, so that so it appeals to them and draws to them, something that will attract them in, get them in there choosing a book, sit down, maybe a cushion and a pillow. I've seen some Key Stage 1 place has got really, really nice, like, I'd want to sit there and read. That's how nice it is. On top of that, we also have a selection of books that are appealing to them. So age appropriate, obviously, easier and harder, chapter books, non-fiction, fiction books, but leveled books as well, so that they can see which ones they can read. And we always encourage 2 books, one that is appropriate for their level and they can read and enjoy, and one that is just for
Slightly harder.
Slightly harder, just a top bit harder, or even if they want something easier, that second book is their choice, their preference, whatever they want to enjoy. Whereas the first book is leveled at the correct level.
It's quite a good way of doing it.
At my current school, we've got library visits once every fortnight, so that they can choose 2 books and bring that back with them, plus the book library in the school. And I found out this interesting fact that every time a child goes to the library, it's like a new experience for them, which I never knew that before. They forget that they've been to the library, apparently, which makes sense about how excited they become every time we go. But that was interesting to know. We also have online platforms. We've got something called Reading Plus, where they can read a range of text and it's pitched at their level, and the algorithm knows what books they're into, so it presents those kinds of books at that kind of level.
Basically Netflix.
Essentially,
Well,
yeah.
speaking of this, have you guys heard of Goodreads?
I have not.
It's an app owned by Amazon, of course.
Of course.
And yeah, you can keep track of all your reading. So all the books you've got, you have in your reading list. You can type in what page you're on. It tells you the percentage. You can look at other people's reviews, and you can put books on your shelf to read later. Books that you've read will stay on a different shelf.
Is that free?
Yeah.
Nice. But there's lots of things so we got Reading Plus. There's also Bug Club that does the same sort of things. And other schools have reading journals, which they have to complete at home. We don't do that personally, but at our school, but I've seen that
I think
a lot.
we used to have that, didn't we?
Book corners have got book reviews, recommended books, and teachers get their own flair into it as well, whatever they want to do to motivate children to read. But reading is definitely pushed and encouraged. And I think that's the difference between primary and secondary. At secondary, I don't think that is pushed as strongly.
I think maybe the first couple of years will be.
Is it? I'm not sure.
I mean, I'm just going by my own experience.
I remember like going to the library in year 7 and stuff like that as a class and things, but I remember it's tapered off, especially as we went into GCSE. But like, just to bring on to that, it's hugely important that I think children keep reading well into secondary school, because I had this class once, I just remember it sticking out quite a lot, because they were very intelligent students. We were looking at, I just wanted to see how good their understanding was. So I just took the first 2 pages of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and then we read it together as a class, and it became very, very clear. These were like 15, 16-year-olds, and they had no idea what he was going on about. Like, their comprehension of the actual book was like what it was, like words and what he was saying.
So they can read the words, they can hear the words individually, but not understand what's going on.
They
just had such a weak grasp of...
It's funny you say that, because even in primary, going as early as Key Stage 1, they've got synthetic phonics and pure phonics and all this stuff. But nowadays, they no longer care about word meaning. So at the early stages, they just teach them how to read the word. So these children will be reading books and pronouncing words that they have no idea what it means. And I see that as a big problem coming up to... Even as early as year 6, coming up to those key stages, we can read these books, but very little understanding or comprehension of what's going on, what the words actually mean. We do assessments, benchmarking with texts, and they're able to read it, just like I said, they're able to read the words that are printed, but they've got no comprehension about what's going on, what the words mean. And they're pushed forward to the next level. It's like, how can they go to the next level?
Like, they could totally read it. Like, as in, like, no trouble with, like, you might have had the odd word where they didn't quite know how to say it. But even like a word like, minute, and it looks like minute.
Yeah.
Like they get tripped up by that sort of thing. But I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, as long as we can explain that. But like, they just couldn't untangle it. It was really difficult trying to sort of convey exactly what he meant. So I had to explain like each part, and just and I've had the similar problems at A level as well, like people not understanding what the hell's going on in the text.
Just reading words.
And well, it's like how does this text fit together and stuff like that. It's like they just get lost. Whilst they can read something, it obviously doesn't indicate how much they understand it.
Not at all.
But also, it kind of shows how holistic reading is, because I think I didn't have those kind of problems, and I think one of the reasons why is because I was exposed to very, I guess, intellectual media early on. So like whether it be listening to the radio or just watching period dramas, something like that.
Yeah.
I never did any of that.
Some of that, not period dramas.
We just didn't do that in our house.
But you get used to, like, for instance, there's a certain type of humour that's evident in like P.G. Wodehouse or something like that. It's like some wordplay, or I can understand that, or I could understand that as a child. And probably one of the reasons is I used to watch like the Jeeves and Wooster series or whatever. And so as a child, I'd be exposed to a variety of media at that level. And I think about like young people these days, what are they watching, what are they exposing themselves to, and
bunch of nonsense, really.
YouTube all day.
They go from that to reading. Yeah, if they go from that to reading War of the Worlds, it's obvious why they wouldn't understand it.
Even a word like minute, you were saying, that comes down to context, doesn't it? The reason they didn't know what that was saying, because they weren't at all in the context of the text.
Well, they couldn't comprehend what comes after, what comes before. So if you were reading it along, you should be able to comprehend what's going on. You realise that it's minute, not...
Good readers, they're reading the sentence they're on, but their eyes subconsciously scanning a few lines ahead. So you're generating context the whole time. But if you're not a good reader, you're reading it, you're just reading that word as it is,
This is why, like, that I brought up earlier that I've noticed with a lot of kids, especially because we teach 11 plus, right? They've got trouble visualizing what's actually going on, and they don't, like, for them it doesn't connect to their imagination.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't understand that, like, because for me it does. Like, for me it's so vivid when I read something.
Yeah, but you've grown up in a different time. Right now there's way more stuff competing for people's attention, and everything has become way more stimulating. Think about a video game when we were younger compared to a video game now.
Yeah, you've got to use your sort of imagination, I guess, more. Or did you need to?
Yeah. With the 3 pixels we had on screen.
They have very little imagination. They have very little...
It's been killed.
It has been killed. They can't think. When they sit there sometimes in my classes, like, trying to write something, and I've given them so many ideas.
God, yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Football.
Yeah.
No, he went to the football game, and then this happened, and then this bomb exploded.
Basically, that's it.
That's every story they write.
But they can't think of anything else because they don't.
They haven't been exposed to anything else.
They don't have the capacity. That they only know what they're presented online and on social media. They don't know anything beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, this leads on to what we were going to talk about, because you've brought in some stuff, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, I thought there was a little journey through, like...
What's you brought in? I'm excited.
Just a few statistics. Reading in children, reading as an adult. What are the benefits and drawbacks? Well, I've written down a couple that stood out to me. Do you want to...
Let's hear it.
What stood out to you in that?
There's a lot of these I can relate to. So there's one which was having books in the home is associated with both reading enjoyment and confidence. Of children who report having fewer than 10 books in their homes, 42% say they do not like reading, and 32% say they are confident readers. For children who report having over 200 books at home, only 12% say they do not like reading, and 73% consider themselves very confident readers. I think that's pretty obvious. If you like, I grew up in a household of books. For me not to like books would be quite difficult. I wouldn't like the home environment I'm in. And I think it's shocking that anyone would only have... But I mean, it does happen. Like, especially in lower... Like, books are not necessarily that cheap. Obviously, you can get them... I think charity shops, brilliant resource for books. I got most of my books from charity shops, especially like philosophy books and things like that. And they're expensive sometimes. And you've got sort of a massive gap between lower income families and higher income families in terms of how many books are in their household.
I find that interesting though. Why do you go from 10 to 200, less than 10 books and more than 200 books? That's a huge jump.
It might be because 200 is a fairly significant amount.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, you got to think about this. This is also like some facts compiled by a charity.
Yeah, of course.
The something that stood out to me was the cognitive development. There's a fact on there about cognitive development.
He's lost it.
It's definitely not on the first.
Reading for pleasure is more important for children's cognitive development than their parents' level of education, and is a more powerful factor in life achievement than socio-economic background. 16-year-olds who choose to read books for pleasure outside of school are more likely to secure managerial or professional jobs later in life.
Oh, wow.
You're not surprised. Like, none of this is surprising to me.
No.
It's not surprising, but it's still shocking, but not surprising.
It's more shocking, like, how as the more and more I do this job, the more surprised I am at how little children read, and especially those who they're having, obviously they've got like say learning difficulties and stuff like that, and they're reading less.
Yeah, I think they're more prominent now as well, actually. Children are less able to learn other curricula if they don't develop skills by middle of primary school. So if they haven't got a decent level of reading by middle of primary school, they're going to struggle with
everything else.
Chemistry, biology, everything else later on.
I can see that, definitely. Yeah. Later on, even then, they'll start struggling.
Yeah, I think if Suriv were here, he'd definitely bring up like worded problems in maths.
Children who read often by age 10 and over once a week at age 16 gain higher results in maths, vocab and spelling tests
None of it's surprising.
None of it is surprising. No, it's just interesting how much of an impact it actually has. And I wonder if parents knew this, would they keep more books in their homes? And I know it's expensive, but you've got the libraries free, and they're desperate for.
I don't think you can keep those.
You don't have to keep those. You just need to borrow them. You should borrow them and read them, right? You need to borrow 2 books, 3 books.
Or just spend something in the library, because there's loads of books there already.
But then there's been a bit of an assault on libraries, like less and less funding available for all libraries.
But because it's being used less and less, isn't it? When you go to the library compared to where it was before.
I mean, I don't think they're that expensive, because if you look on, I know everything's on Amazon, but firstly, they outcompete the price generally. But if you look underneath the main price, it shows you the used price, and you can usually pick up these books for a couple of quid.
The only thing with that is, I would say, because in my school I work in Hackney, we've got some very underprivileged families. We've got people that are single parents that are struggling for food and electricity. So when it comes down to that kind of...
Yeah.
If you're at that level, like...
Because they're not necessarily... Because they're working class as well. They've got single parents who are working, but just not making ends meet. And especially now, to spend £5 or £6 on a book, because you don't want to get any rubbish book, generate interest. But the libraries are there. The libraries are there. Libraries are free. You can still get a book. You can spend an hour in the library. There's nothing wrong with every Saturday spending an hour in the library with your child.
Yeah, I used to do that actually.
Yeah, that will generate interest.
I'll do my homework in there.
Yeah.
Something that stood out to me when I was working for the Literacy Pirates now, or the Hackney Pirates, was that some parents couldn't help their children read. So in the first place, the child was, and what also something that I noticed was the children who couldn't read were more likely to be aggressive. They're more likely to, first of all, have a really bad relationship with just reading in the first place, because they've obviously got no confidence in reading. Thus, you're trying to get them to read and they can't read. And it just gets them really frustrated. So,
not even that, they can't verbalise how they're feeling.
They can't communicate, can they? The communication skills and the vocabulary are limited to express themselves. I've got kids that, when it comes to reading, they'll shut down. They might, like boys especially, they love the maths because it's quite concrete, right and wrong. But reading, when it comes to reading lesson, they will do anything they can to get removed from that class. And it's like, well, I know what you want. You're not going anywhere. You will read.
It's always like, oh, we finished. Like when we're doing it here, they're like, done our maths. 10-minute break for everyone to go to the bathroom, whatever else. Come back, start English, and most of the boys are like, can I go to the toilet?
Yeah,
like, you just had 10 minutes. No, I know what you're trying to do.
I know what's going on.
Sit back down.
But it's just that, and I think it comes down to reading more. You can't. I say to the children, you can't. There's certain things you can't teach. You can't teach them how to. You can teach them how to read, but they have to read to build that comprehension, the confidence. It's like riding a bike. The more you ride a bike, the better you become at it.
This is why I think, primary schools, they've kind of gone down this route of, I've noticed this in teaching SATs, for instance.
Yeah.
The children are required to have such a technical understanding of spelling, punctuation, grammar, especially grammar. I honestly think they're totally missing the point, because really they need to get to this stage where it's like the language, it sort of floods over them rather than...
It's the difference between sitting and reading a dictionary or sitting and reading several different types of things, because you're not going to know every single rule. You're not going to memorize every single rule, and most of the rules, there's more exceptions than there are.
Yeah.
So the best way to learn all of the grammar and stuff is to be exposed to a variety of different things.
Like you need to let it inhabit you rather than it make reading a habit, and make, like I said, when you read something, it becomes part of you, and it will have usually a good effect on what you end up writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are the benefits of reading as an adult?
As an adult,
a few on there. Was it on there or on there? I mean, for me, the benefits are...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No, go on.
For me, the benefits are just, from what I'm reading, it helps me to be better at communicating with other people. It helps me to grow the business. It helps me to grow myself as a person.
You experience greater life satisfaction from reading, and higher self-esteem and confidence if you read more. I mean, like, you feel a sense of achievement in reading something.
Completing a book. I think it also gives you experience of things that you wouldn't otherwise have experienced. Makes you more knowledgeable in certain areas.
The benefits span across age groups. And also, just to sort of give you an illustration of what I think has sort of gone a bit wrong, is because we're focusing on all these technical issues in school, like grammar and stuff like that. When you learn a language, most people don't enjoy the grammar and the drilling and stuff like that. The thing that made my Chinese learning take off was actually
Go in there.
reading a book and going there and talking to people. It wasn't tables of things, and it wasn't like exercises. They have their purpose, but I find that with any language, it's a lot more holistic. And yeah, we seem to be making English more and more like a foreign language. I suppose it is because
A lot of them are EL.
you do in schools. They take, obviously they've got to change the curriculum. You get development in how the and the curriculum changes, but then I think it takes something away when you add these layers of technical complexity to it, when it should just be a simple pleasure.
You were talking about going over there and talking to people. I'm glad you brought that up, because actually that's where a lot of the language development comes from. The books develop the language once you have some foundation or premise to build on. And a lot of children are not communicating with their parents. They're not having conversations with parents. They're not engaging in just everyday talk. Life experiences build up vocabulary, build up comprehension, build up understanding, which then relates to a book. And language and vocabulary becomes a lot more accessible to those children. You can't expect them to read a book and just know what it means. Where is that language and vocabulary coming from? It's from everyday experiences, it's from interaction, it's from talking to each other. And parents, this is a lot of children in less affluent communities especially, are missing out on that language. For example, we had a child, got lots of these examples, but they're reading a book, they didn't know what a gutter was.
I remember you said that and it's the last podcast.
This always sticks in my head, because actually it's everywhere in this country. So how can a child be in year 6 and not know what that word means and have no
exposure to it?
Like, you literally can't walk past the street without seeing it.
Yeah, it's on every building.
It's on every building. So this comes down to communication. So he's reading this text, not understood any of it. But where is the language and where is the build-up from the parent?
Well, I think that depends on the family, depends on how affluent they are. But a lot of parents will just say, right, you're going to school or you go to tuition. They'll teach you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
They don't actually communicate.
They don't take responsibility, do they? I think I read a statistic once, and don't hold me to this, but it was talking about how children in affluent families have got over 9,000 more vocabulary bank than children in less affluent families. And that's a huge gap, 9,000 extra words in the bank.
They did a white collar worker,
and that's even without
worker.
a book. That's before they read a book. That's just from interaction with their parents. It's like, wow.
Then it depends how educated the parents are.
Again, yeah.
Whether they were educated here, whether they even speak English in their home.
True, again.
Because they might speak English at school and they go home and
don't speak their home language.
Yeah.
In some cases it's a catch-22. Like, I definitely, in my charity work, I definitely encountered situations where I was like, okay, well, it's quite difficult. Like, no one can read in the family. You've got a cycle, essentially. It perpetuates itself, and then it has to become the school's responsibility in that case, which can be very difficult. And obviously, like, the school can only provide so much support. It comes down to like how actually schools need a lot more support. And teachers need a lot more support.
Click here to the previous.
I think about it this way: like, when you get imagine this hypothetical child can't read, struggles with literacy, struggles in school, falls into bad crowds, in the end becomes like a problem in society, and it all stems from this thing that is so basic, and they fall through the cracks. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go into education in the first place. I've met a few like year 6s and they can't read, and is quite shocking. And it does feel really good to teach them that stuff, but then and actually help children reach that level where they can communicate well and read well and
the
that kind of
language.
thing. And you see it, like I've seen it. I had a Key Stage 1 kid who couldn't really read at all when he started, and now he's able to read. Like it's taken a lot of persistence, a lot of like telling the parent how to do it and that kind of thing, and sort of forcing him to some extent. But to be honest, as long as he feels in a good mood, he's quite happy to read now. Like, as in, it actually fills him with a bit of confidence. So there's so many children in that situation where you've got to do the easy work first. So essentially, you've got a lot of kids that could very easily, with just some simple changes, reach a
easy fixes.
high level. But then you've also got those edge cases that are very, very difficult to deal with, where the parent can't speak English,
there are
can't
some
read
challenging situations, aren't there?
Yeah, those are really, really difficult. And I think the only possible way to help those kids is you got charities and also schools stepping in. So they need...
To bring it back to the school again, what I find interesting is that accountability for teachers. In year 6, they've got the end of year assessment, so it's so much pressure that the child, that's when it's picked up that this child can't read. And I'm thinking, how do they get through primary education and they come to year 6 and now you're telling me he can't read or she can't read? What were the other teachers doing since year 3, since Key Stage 1? What happened? Where did it go wrong? Because how can they get that far in education without being picked up earlier by not just a class teacher but SOT? How does someone get through school without...
I think it's like before... Was it before 6 years old or something like that? Like, if you can't read sort of a basic book by the time you're like
Mid-level of primary, we said it earlier.
mid-level, so like year 3,
4, year 5,
year 4.
4, about year 4.
So what are the year 4 teachers doing? What are they doing? Why can't they...
Chanel.
No, but I mean, like she's great because she emphasizes literacy. You can in the way that she
you get some
approaches
you get some really good teachers, don't you? That really go out their way to make sure they pick up every child. But then you get these other teachers that don't do that, and you're like,
yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on fiction versus fiction? Does it matter what you read? As a first year, as a child, second year, as an adult, do you think it matters? Do you think you need...
I think as a child, it has to be a balance of both, especially when you're aiming towards the end of Key Stage 2, the SATs. You have to have a balance of fiction and non-fiction.
I guess the SATs have that, don't they? Yeah. They've got like one fiction text, one
non-fiction, and the other one could be a poetry or whatever it is. But the non-fiction is where you get your... And we do try to teach a balance of both, because the non-fiction is where you get your background knowledge, because a lot of these things that come up in the test are not everyday exposures, they're not everyday life situations, so they need to get that experience from the non-fiction.
Like general knowledge type.
Yeah, that's it, general knowledge. And only through non-fiction can you build that up. And the fiction is there for vocabulary, language, author tone, storytelling.
It's also holistic.
It's also, yeah.
I mean, I can get the point that sometimes, say you got a reluctant boy reader. We're one who's autistic, and the tutor concentrated on non-fiction comprehension, specifically non-fiction, before moving on to fiction. And I'm like, that totally makes sense. Like, he's even more interested in things over people, and I think that way appealed to him. So sometimes like non-fiction is gateway into fiction. And to be honest, as long as they're reading anything,
as long as they're reading, that's the first thing.
I used to read all kinds of things, but I mean, it is important as well. It depends on the aims. Like, for instance, if you've got a child going for 11 plus, getting them to read at least one classic book, I think is quite important. It will have a massive impact on the result.
And they're usually the things that actually come up in the paper anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it was probably very unfair. Like, the fact that they source texts from... They tend to source quite old texts. for these selection tests. Sometimes I just think, who's your target market is essentially the ones who are, obviously more affluent. Like most children wouldn't go near
those kind of texts
Dickens or something like that, and yet they can come up in an exam. And to be honest, it shows nothing about the intelligence of the child capability. It does, however, show a certain environment that the child is growing up in. So if their aim is to increase social mobility, then with their selection, and they say that it is,
that's not work out like that, is it?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. Anything that sources for like a level vocabulary, for instance, wouldn't like that. That's highly dependent on the affluence of your parents and the demographic that you're aiming at. Obviously, you can cram a child full of vocabulary, but I find that children hate that.
It doesn't stick anyways. The vocabulary doesn't stick. When you cram them full of vocabulary, it doesn't stick.
It only sticks in context.
Only sticks in context.
It sticks with certain children who have a real sense of, like, if you can make it competitive, if you can make it like I have to bring those elements in sometimes. Like, if we've got limited time, I mean, you gotta.
It's not just that. I usually use it as like a joke. So if somebody's misbehaving, if we've learned some words, like, I don't know, say we learned the word miscreant, for example.
Everyone's a miscreant that day.
Yeah.
Let's say you're being a miscreant, you've done this, this and this, and those 3 words that I would use would be words from the list.
Yeah.
And they all laugh and they understand the context of it and they remember it. Yeah. There's just behind you, there's the cards there.
Oh yeah.
Well, you're talking about the competitive,
the whiz cards.
Yeah, the whiz cards. Yeah,
I like those cards.
So I even do this with some Key Stage 3 kids, and
they're quite difficult words, some of them.
But I mean, it's not the ideal way to learn these words. I mean, it's really hard when a child has no connection to a word. They haven't even seen it before. So
that one looks relatively. Yeah.
Yeah, like so many children haven't actually heard that word by year 6 or whatever, or they've heard it in a very loose context. So books give you the opportunity to experience a word in a context. Even if the child doesn't know exactly what it means at the time, they may work it out. They may either be able to work it out, or they might be tempted to look it up. When I was young, I used to just look up words. With my dad, I'd be like, "Dad, what does this mean?" And then he'd go, "Okay, just go check the dictionary." And then I'd
see they hate it when I do that.
We've done it.
What I do now is I made up another game called Dictionary Wars. Dictionary Wars. So because when I say look it up, they're like, "Oh," and then I say, "Go get 2 dictionaries. If you can find it quicker than me, I'll go next door and buy you a chocolate." And then they're like, and now they all want to look up words all the time.
We've been doing a lot of work on spelling and vocabulary because last year we didn't do very well for our grammar. So we've done a lot of research-based things, and a couple of things that they need to do, they need to see it visually. So now when I'm teaching, like, we teach vocabulary every reading lesson, I'll have 3 different pictures for the same word. That's the first thing. Second thing is in context. I have 3 or 4 different sentences with the same word, and then they have to put it into the context themselves. And there's something silly like they have to use it 14 times or something like that. I can't remember the exact, but I was surprised by how many times they have to use it before it becomes a part of their vocabulary. So we do, just like I said, dictionary games, word searches, match the pictures, sentences. Like, there's so many different things you do, but they have to be using it all the time before it becomes part of their vocabulary. And it's really, really challenging because actually we can teach these words, we can use it for that day, but we won't use it enough times in that day.
Yeah.
For it
to the repetition element of it, yeah.
Like, memory is highly linked to emotions.
Mm. Yeah,
obviously.
definitely.
And I think if the child doesn't... This is why audiobooks are, I think, a brilliant gateway for children who are reluctant to read, because they put on the voices, they say things with a certain emphasis, and then it's actually easier to work out what something means. I've learned a lot of words through audio.
If you can do that alongside actually following along.
That's good. I do, if I want to learn like a text really well, this is always a tip that I give to students, because you've got to learn like Shakespeare plays in a lot of depth. I always say follow it along and listen to an audiobook at the same time of the thing, and there's usually one somewhere on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be there somewhere. Yeah, they'll have it.
Find a good version that you enjoyed to listen to, and then follow along. And the words hit you that much more impactfully, and you're able to remember them.
Yeah.
So yeah, little tip there.
Anything else you guys want to add before we wrap up?
Read.
Get reading.
We'll leave a few links to some of the books we have here, what we're reading at the moment.
Goodreads as well, which is free.
Goodreads. There's also a book list on the website, which we'll link down below as well.
Thanks for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be coming up again soon. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and share with your family and friends.